Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host today. Today is our 5th general meeting since July 1st. With amazing speed, we formed a great team and hosted leading organizations behind key bills, preparing about 10 bills for a climate bill package, which is shaping up nicely. The range of legislation covers a lot, but not all by far, of what's required to reduce greenhouse gases in time to prevent irreversible damage to our planet's ecosystems and cataclysmic destruction of our way of life and millions of animal species that took millions of years for Earth to create. In the climate bill package, on the agricultural front, we have bills to support regenerative agriculture, planting billions of trees and restoring wetlands with a big job core. We have bills banning toxic pesticides and large confined animal feeding operations, and a bill to stop big green mergers in food and ag with a review of antitrust issues there. And very excitingly, we have a bill banning import of products from illegally deforested areas globally. These bills tackle carbon sequestration, impact key industries polluting our world, and bring together activists from many arenas who are passionate about these causes, but so far not powerful enough alone to achieve legislative victory, which is where you come in. The package also has bills on materials, which we'll discuss today, including bans on hydrofluorocarbons and plastics, and bills on fossil fuels, which we'll discuss today, the banned Fracking Bill. We also have a bill to eliminate tax subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. This idea notably was not included in the DNC platform, although Nigeria, a big oil economy nation, has made that commitment recently, I hear. Our big goal with this project and beyond is to unite the various movements and organizations in common cause, because we do not have the power required to defeat the triumvirate of big ag, big oil, and big pharma. So unity is a strategic imperative, and there is no time to waste. The appetite is there now for major climate action in Congress in 2021, but we need more infrastructure and coordination to be ready to seize that moment. With this project, we're doing our small part, helping to align the policy advocates and bringing in faith groups, marketing expertise, and activists from various groups all over the nation. This is not a substitute, however, for major civil society entities, and the big greens especially, to create a public-facing coalition so that we are ready for next year. And I urge everyone on the call to call upon those entities with big capacity and status to come forward and publicly explain their plan to save Earth with action in 2021 so we can all join together. If you are aware of other macro organizing on this front, please let us know and let's invite those leaders to present here. For now, there are two main prongs to our work. One, our policy sector teams, divided up by the drawdown and policy digest sectors, energy, transportation, the 8 or 9 of them or so, environmental justice, just transition. I wasn't going to list them, there are too many. Those teams are forming now, and I invite everyone to join one today by filling out the form, which we'll put in the chat. Rachel, if you could go ahead and put that form in the chat, that would be great. Those teams will review legislation, and they will review the House Climate Crisis Select Committee's Climate Action Plan, comparing that and the bills to our policy digest to see what's covered and what's missing, highlighting the greenhouse gas impacts and analyzing the scale and timeline for a transition from greenhouse gases. Please join a team today with the form that's also in the chat. And those teams will be meeting on the 1st and 3rd Mondays of every month, along with our core team organizing, and we'll divvy up those calls and have breakouts for the sector teams, and then they'll work by emails. We'll talk a little bit more about those teams at the end of the call. The second area is our Adopt a District effort, organizing in the 435 congressional districts nationwide. We have almost 40 districts adopted in over 15 states. And again, we invite everyone on the call to adopt their district, filling out the form in the chat. Those district leaders will organize locally to engage the elected officials to endorse the climate bill package as we prepare for greater coordination next year. Local groups can always decide which bills they will advocate for in the package, so don't feel confined by that. And we encourage the local analysis of the bills to draw your teams together and more deeply into the policy. We'll have more on this again at the end of the meeting today. Organizationally, we're starting with the climate bill package to get us deep into the policy analysis and unite those groups and coalitions with active campaigns. The package will go over time as we consider new legislation, and the current goal is to launch the package by Climate Week, September 20th, which again, we'll discuss more about later. Before then, it'd be great to get 100 districts adopted and broad consensus on the package, which we're very close to. For that, we also have a poll on the package of bills that will also be in the chat for you to consider filling out after the meeting, ideally, once you've heard more. Please send along any other bills for consideration. I know there are a couple new environmental justice bills, and we're figuring out when to present those and if we can add them to the package in time for Climate Week without overwhelming everyone. And as I say, this will be a rolling process, adding new bills over time. Today, our agenda includes 3 bills for the package with experts from 3 great groups joining us to go into those. Well, and to get us started, we're going to start with our marketing team, but I think we're going to postpone that a little bit. And instead, we're going to start with, drum roll. I was reading that and I'm not sure who all's here. So since I know Brian's here, we're going to, Brian, take you out of turn a little bit if that's okay. We're going to invite Brian Langloss from Oceana, who's going to tell us more about the exciting plastics bill, which you've heard about in prior calls by Delegate Creamer from Center for Biological Diversity. And we're in touch with Judith Enoch from that Plastics Coalition, and she's on another important call today. And she has kindly invited us to invite Brian. And we're very excited to have you, Brian. Welcome to our project, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And it is very nice to see some of the attendees here who have already worked so hard to advance the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Hello, Rachel. I see Nancy. How are you, Nancy? Hello, Rabbi. It's so good to see all of you, and thank you very much for having me. So I'm just going to take up a few minutes, please, to talk about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. What does plastic have to do with carbon emission? If plastic, just plastic in general, if plastic were a country, it would be the 5th highest CO2 emitter in the world. Plastic warms the planet twice as much as the aviation industry. So this is a carbon issue. It's not only a pollution issue, it's a carbon issue. Climate change and the plastics crisis, they're intrinsically linked. It's impossible to fight one problem without considering the other. So I am going to share my screen because I'd like to just kind of describe briefly, and I promise I'll be brief, what this plastic pollution crisis is and the legislation that has been proposed to address it. So pardon me one moment, screen share. Great, thank you. So as mentioned, I am with Oceana. I work with Judith Inc. from Beyond Plastic, as well as a pretty wide coalition, including Surfrider and several other groups, New York PIRG, Environmental Advocates of New York. And this is the bill, this Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is the bill that we've all been waiting to see. And let me just show you this brief graphic. I'd like to show you what the problem with plastic is. Plastic is not a consumer problem. It's not a problem of consumers failing to recycle. It's not a problem of consumers littering on the side of the highway or on the beach. The plastic problem is a production problem. If you notice, that's a New York City garbage truck in there, in this little graphic. And what we're looking at, roughly 17.6 billion pounds of plastic enter the marine environment every year. And that's roughly the equivalent of dumping a garbage truck full of plastic into the oceans every minute. So that rain of plastic you just saw is happening every minute. We do not have a consumer problem. We have a production problem. And that is definitely where, a lot of the companies who are carbon companies are also involved. So the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is special because it seeks to address not plastic cleanup, it seeks to address this production problem by holding plastic producers responsible for their products. So just to very briefly go into the basic elements of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. In the first place, something that makes me very proud about being a New Yorker is that New York has a beverage container refund program, and it's a highly effective one, and it's a good model for the rest of the nation. So one of the first things I like about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is that it would institute a nationwide beverage container refund program, which is the very essence of requiring product producers to take responsibility. But that's not all. As you see, number 2, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act would require product producers to take responsibility for their product waste. So producers of covered products would be required to design, manage, and most importantly, to finance programs to collect and process their product waste that would normally burden state and local governments and local tax bases. So this is all sorts of plastic packaging, containers, food service products, and also paper, regardless of recyclability, compostability, type of material. This also includes plastic, paper, glass, and metal, so that any type of product that is produced, the producer would have to take responsibility for its entire life cycle. The legislation would encourage producers to cooperate with those who produce similar products through producer responsibility organizations to, again, take responsibility for their waste and implement cleanup programs with EPA approval. Producers would be required to cover the costs of waste management and cleanup, as well as they would have to finance awareness-raising measures for these covered products. So I'm sure we all know about the container refund, the beverage container refund program. So just to move on to the other elements, a minimum recycled content requirement provision. One of the reasons recycling doesn't work, and I mean, I hate to, if anyone here is all excited about recycling, I hate to burst your bubble, but less than 9% of all plastics have ever been recycled. Recycling is simply just not effective. Even if you live, let's say you live in Utopia and they have the best recycling infrastructure, it's not an infrastructure issue. It really is a market issue. There's very little market for post-consumer recycled products. And so that's why so much gets shipped off to third world countries and developing countries. That's why so much just ends up falling through the cracks and into the oceans. So requiring a minimum recycled content provision would require the companies that have produced all this plastic to start mining their own waste to see what they can do with it. One of my favorite provisions would be, as you see, number 4, preventing U.S. plastic waste from being shipped to developing countries. Naturally, there are a lot of environmental justice implications here. We often hear about the Asian rivers that dump all of this plastic into the ocean, when the reality is that those Asian countries are in receipt of a lot of American plastic. And number 5, I think this is a big winner. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act would put a temporary pause on new and expanded plastic production facilities until the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act standards are updated. And this is very important because, again, plastic is produced from petroleum. So again, this is a production problem. We're not able to keep up with even if everyone was recycling. Again, less than 9% of plastics have been recycled. So not to close on a scary thought, but we think we have plastic pollution now to deal with. By 2050, we're going to look back fondly on this year 2020, and we're going to say, remember when it was just plastic bottles and hypodermic needles? Because in 2050, it's going to really be a crisis. We have about, we have a closing window to deal with this, because as plastic production increases, so too does the rate of pollution. And again, I don't want to knock recycling, because I know a lot of us religiously, I do it as well. I just like to do what I can, but recycling is not the answer. I don't like graphs and numbers and everything. I like stories. So if I may just tell you a brief, share a brief little story with you to try to illuminate why recycling doesn't work. And I'm sorry, Rabbi Judith and Rachel and Nancy, because I think you've already heard this story. But imagine that your bathtub is overflowing and the water is just spilling over your bathtub and it's flooding your bathroom. You're in this crisis. What are you going to do? Are you going to grab a mop and start mopping up the water that's spilling out of your bathtub onto the floor? No, that would not make sense. What you should do is turn the faucet off because then the water would stop pouring into the bathtub. Recycling is the mop. Cleanup is the mop. These kind of, highly funded programs of let's stop littering America, that's the mop. The problem is the faucets. We need to turn off this production pipeline. And again, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is the piece of legislation that all of our groups have been waiting for. We're all very excited about this. And if you would like to join our effort to get more co-sponsors onto the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, you see the link in the bottom. Certainly feel free to sign up for that link. What you'll do is you'll find that we're asking for your address and zip code. Don't worry, I can barely get my Christmas cards out. I'm not going to mail you anything. We just have to know who your member of Congress is, because we need everyone on board this Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, and especially the delegation representing New York, because again, New York has a bottle deposit program that it may not be perfect, but it's a pretty effective example that the rest of the nation could follow. So New York definitely has a leadership role here to play, and there's no excuse for any of our members of Congress not to be a co-sponsor of this bill. And in closing, I just want to give you just a quick timeline of what's happening with this bill. Again, several attendees in today's meeting were part of a couple of prior in-district lobby meetings with local members of Congress that worked. We have gotten members of Congress to co-sponsor the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And this is very important because, as you know, November, there's going to be an election. There will be a whole new Congress, the 117th Congress in the new year, and the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, unless it passes the House and, Senator McConnell decides to advance it through the Senate and the current president decides to sign it into law, this bill is going to have to be reintroduced next year. And we want the strongest bill possible. And that means we're, on the long list of bills that are going to need to be reintroduced, we need to show that there are a lot of co-sponsors from the 116th Congress on the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act so that the 117th Congress will take it up. So this is a very important time to get these co-sponsors. And that's what that link on your screen is all about. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I'd certainly be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Wonderful, Brian. Thank you so much. And it seems like there are several questions. Just real quickly, how many sponsors are there currently? And how many, tell us about your plans. You have several districts in play, so you coordinate individual in-district meetings. This is what we want to do as well, but for the whole package, obviously, including this. So just a little bit, how many co-sponsors are there, and what are how are you identifying your targets?
So thank you for asking that question. So co-sponsors, we have, let me just, oh good, my screen, I can actually tell you that right now. We have, in New York State, I think we have, it's up to 8 in New York State, which is not bad. Co-sponsors nationwide, we have 80. Oh, actually we have 9 in New York, and that's because of the members in this group who helped us get Representative Nadler on board. So we are
Great.
At districts in, across New York State, primarily because whether they're Democrat or Republican, and because several of the provisions in the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, most notably, again, the bottle refund program, these provisions are in effect statewide in New York. Instead of asking the 50 states to try to, create a patchwork of different regulations, think of how confusing that would be, not only for consumers, but also for producers who are going to be, beholden to the standards of these different states. There needs to be a unified, streamlined, easy for everyone package of provision of standards. And that is what this nationwide bill, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, would do. And again, because New York already has some of these provisions in effect, there's no reason for any member of Congress in New York State to not co-sponsor this. Now, we have started from the New York City area based on that premise, simply because New York City was banned, polystyrene before New York State did. New York City banned plastic bags before New York State did. So the entire delegation in Washington, D.C. representing New York City must be on this bill. So that has been where we've started, but we definitely need as many members of Congress from around New York State as possible. And it would be especially helpful to get Republican members of Congress on board as well, because the New York PIRG and Environmental Advocates of New York, I'll send around as a follow-up the New York PIRG study they did relating job growth to the fulfillment of a bottle deposit program. And I don't think anyone these days is opposed to creating local jobs.
All right, wonderful. So great. Well, we have several districts adopted in New York and about almost 40 around the country. So we'll compare that. We have a list of all the bills and all the Congress people and who has sponsored what. And we're trying to keep that current. But we'll talk more about that later in our follow-up efforts. And we'll need materials for our package on this. But let's see the questions. Rachel, do you have questions lined up?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions. So our first question is, where in the plastic life cycle is the greenhouse gas emission problem? Is it from production? Is it from recycling? Other times? And coupled with that, would replacement products have less of a GHG impact?
Thank you. That's a really good question, because emissions occur throughout the entire life cycle of plastic products. These are petroleum products. So through fracking and through all of these really dangerous and dirty methods of retrieving oil and gas, this petroleum which is needed to create plastic, of course, creates emission. And then it goes into the market. And that's carbon intensive because it's transported through a very wide distribution. And then recycling. I mean, when you think about how awful recycling is, not only is recycling, just poorly performing in terms of being a solution. Again, not 9% of plastic has ever been recycled, but most of what we think of as a recycled plastic, it's shipped to these developing nations, and that's carbon intensive. So, and then if it is recycled, and just so you know, most plastic, it actually breaks down. It becomes a lower quality plastic each time it's recycled. So most plastic, even the plastic that is recycled, can only be recycled a second time. So then it is kind of subject to a pretty carbon intensive and very wide distribution. Whereas alternatively, materials that stay, kind of local, like a bottle deposit program, it gets back to the stores. Glass and metal, which these can be used, you can keep recycling glass, and that can stay, in one market without it being shipped very much. So, I mean, unfortunately, there's carbon emission attached to pretty much anything you do, but it is much less to use a product like glass or recycled aluminum or or anything that stays within the hands of either the consumer, who anything from rewashing their reusable containers to staying in the hands of a certain company like a grocery store that would retrieve its plastic packaging, or its reusable packaging. These kind of closed loop networks tend to stay local. So therein you can find a lot of savings from carbon emissions.
So Rachel has more questions. I'm just curious if you can tell us a little example of how the industry taking responsibility for its own waste streams will eliminate those waste streams.
Yes, so right now, let's say you're a beverage company and you don't have to account for the full life, of your product. You put your beverage in a plastic bottle, and then once that hits the shelf, you're not responsible for it. You pass off the external cost of dealing with that plastic bottle to taxpayers and local municipalities. So under the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, a beverage company would have to look not only at plastic, but metal, glass, and all of the available materials, and you would have to finance and design the program that would return it to you. So I would hate to speculate as to what that might look like, because I lack the R&D training that is certainly available to these very large companies. But what it would, to answer your question as succinctly as possible, it would look like companies no longer passing off their external costs to taxpayers. It would look like companies actually taking, responsibility for the full cycle of the products they put out there. And it would be interesting to see how many advantages how many advantages for these companies will result in them being able to use the same product and to keep things in one area, to keep the loop closed.
All right. So it's to be determined how they're going to do it, but I get the idea. Rachel?
Well, think about and just, again, this is just an analogy, but I mean, Netflix, they send you the DVD and then it would be sent right back to them. So I think the question would be a matter of fulfillment, and it's that technology is there. So it would be very interesting to see what the design of that looks like. But and that's where a lot of questions are. But this is America. We push the envelope on everything, and I think that I'm very excited to see what it could look like.
Yeah, wonderful. Rachel, a couple more, and then we might have to move on, but go ahead.
Sure. We have a question of why production is going to increase so exponentially in the coming decades.
So there are a lot of theories about that. I don't want to plagiarize. I encourage all of you to watch a fantastic documentary called The Story of Plastic, where they show you, from petroleum to plastic. They show you the pipeline of, the oil and gas companies to plastic producers to consumer goods. And their theory is that as people turn away from oil, for whatever reason, they're afraid of climate change, or they live in areas where there's a regulatory risk to using oil. Oil companies still want to make money, so they're still going to sell oil, but just in the form of plastic. And so that is the theory behind the story of plastic, that these oil and gas producers have just found a new product to sell you. And with all the money they have available for marketing and distribution, have you noticed, I remember when I was little, I never saw an apple cut up and the apple slices in individual plastic. That's just lazy. Get applesauce if you can't chop your own apples. But I never saw those things. But now you go in a grocery store and you see like the mango is cut open, it's in plastic. Too bad the mango didn't have its own packaging, like a mango shell. So you're finding more product placement as a result of just the far reach and wide resources of plastic producers to get plastic products onto shelves and into consumer.
Brian just got muted for the end of that sentence.
I'm sorry. That was my mistake.
Right, no worries.
Brian, can you read the last sentence?
Yeah, you know what? I can be a little bit more succinct. Consumers just aren't given the choice is the answer. Products are being forced on consumers in plastic. And so that's the problem. That's why we're seeing so much more plastic, and that's why production is going to skyrocket.
Thank you. There are a couple of quick logistical questions about the bill. One is, when do the requirements go into effect, assuming it passes? And another is, who are the congressional leaders?
Yes, thank you. So the first question is that I would hate to answer it, and then after this bill goes into conference, that changes. Keep in mind, this bill, it's not like it's not like a pair of shoes where we're going to sell this to someone and they're going to wear the exact pair of shoes. Hopefully the House will pass this, and if the House passes it, then the Senate will have to pass it, and then it'll conference. And what that means is that everybody on both sides will get together and say, this is the final bill that we want to go through. So that will probably determine.
Up. You've been muted again somehow.
I unmuted myself. That
Okay.
would probably, those details would be hammered out, but it would probably be a year. I mean, I don't, that's a detail that is usually left to conferencing, but it would probably be a year.
Yeah.
In
We have
terms of leadership, Senator Udall, as well as Representative Lowenthal, they have been the leaders. Senator Udall is leading the bill in the Senate, and there is a companion bill, in the House, and that is Representative Lowenthal's project. And so, and thanks for asking that question, because we need not only our members of Congress, but also our senators to join it. As of right now, neither Senators Gillibrand nor Schumer have co-sponsored the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. So if you speak to a member of Congress about co-sponsoring this bill, you can refer to it as the Lowenthal bill, because that's who's running it, that's who's leading it in the House. And if you try to speak to your senators about co-sponsoring the Senate companion, it's the Udall bill, because Senator Udall is leading it through that chamber.
And all of that information, of course, is on our bill summary materials. All right, well, I think we could go on for a while on plastics because it's such an exciting topic and people are so passionate about it. But I think we need to move on. And Rachel, unless there was anything urgent or...
There were a few more questions, but I know we need to be cognizant of time.
We do, because it's already 12:36 and we have 2 more bills and then a little closing at the end. So, but Brian, if you're available to stay with us, by all means, you're welcome to. And next up, Alex, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Hi,
All right.
Todd.
Great. I do have more questions about plastics bill too, but I guess we'll have to hold them because we can talk forever about it. But in the meantime, we're moving on. Alex Hilbrand from NRDC, who was with us once before, is here to talk about the refrigerants. I call it Refrigerants Bill. He'll give you the full details. And this is an important bill that has a lot of consensus, and it's, reducing hydrofluorocarbons, it's sort of a win-win-win. It has broad-based support. So we just want to get everybody up to speed, get a little bit more than, we'll start with what we did last time, I guess, Alex's, and then a little bit more in depth and take any questions on that once he's completed his remarks. Welcome, Alex, and thanks so much for coming back.
Sure, Todd. It's a pleasure to be back with you, and happy to talk in some more detail about the AIM Act, the Ban Refrigerants Bill. I love that in the email. It doesn't do quite that, but it's pretty good. So let me take you through exactly what we have on the table here. I am going to share my screen. So, oh, nope, I have to share it first. Okay. Boy, I have about 12 options here. Sorry. Are you all seeing something that looks vaguely like a...
That's it.
PowerPoint. Okay, so American Innovation and Manufacturing Act doesn't exactly reveal what it's about, but nonetheless. So I'll just give you a quick status update. I'm realizing this should have come after a description, but here we are. So this is a bill to phase down the production and importation of HFCs according to the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol in the United States. This agreement was struck back in 2016. The US signed it, but did not ratify it. So since then, we've been trying to get going. And so these bills are a little bit more evolved than some others. They were introduced in the last Congress, the SIT 116. Here we have 5544 in the House and 2754 in the Senate. 28 equally drawn co-sponsors in the House and 34 in the Senate. There were subcommittee committee hearings in the early spring. The Senate one was remote, as you can imagine, and that sort of passed without major to-do. We're a little bit hung up with approval by Environment and Public Works, as perhaps you can imagine. So I will describe a bit about what this bill does. At its core, it's a similar concept to turning off the taps of plastic. The goal here is to turn off the taps of HFCs. It would phase down by 85% in 15 years production and importation of HFCs, which we reckon pretty much covers the ways that they originate. And this is all according to, again, this schedule that was struck as part of an amendment to the Montreal Protocol in 2016, the Kigali Amendment. So these gases are used in all the places, your air conditioner, your refrigerator, some foams that insulate your houses, that previously used substances that deplete the stratospheric ozone layer. So these are replacements. It's good that we began to use them by and large because they're better than the ozone destroying substances that came before and actually less greenhouse gas intensive, but they still have very significant global warming. So that's why we're after them. And so let me talk through in some detail about what this bill does. It is pretty much the bill that we were all hoping for in the sense that it is pretty robust in our opinion. It follows from the 1990, its contents basically draws from the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, Title VI, which implemented the original Montreal Protocol on ozone depleting substances, is now more or less refreshed with 30 years of wisdom since then to cover HFCs. So this is again a drawdown in production and importation of HFCs by 85% along a schedule that is prescribed between now and 2036. I have a slide on climate benefits that will show you that visually. The bill importantly provides authority for EPA to accelerate this pace. It's already, a pretty good clip, some 5% a year, but it's not instantaneous. There is a tradition at the Montreal Protocol to start and strengthen. And I think we've been working under that kind of philosophy moving forwards. It also includes the authority for third parties to petition EPA to do various things, including accelerate, and something else that I'll get to in a moment, which is an important piece. It actually also requires EPA to implement measures to prevent leaks of HFCs that do continue to get out there, be sold. The HFCs already installed in all the cooling type equipment that we have in the US. That's an important one because, as you can imagine, although we're addressing production and importation, that doesn't directly affect emissions of the gases that are already out there and that are permitted as the phase down progresses. So this would address things like disposal, recycling, reclamation, and destruction of appliances using HFCs, well, really HFCs themselves during the disposal of those products, for example. EPA also has an important authority in this bill, which is to ban HFCs in any specific application where it sees a better alternative is available. And that's also something, by the way, that petitions can come in to address. And so, for example, if home air conditioning, EPA sees that there's a better substance available, it can ban outright the HFCs that have been used so far going into your home air conditioner. That's important because, again, it layers on top of this overall supply reduction that is the phase down and can help it move much more quickly in reality. This bill does not ratify the Kigali Amendment. Traditionally, that is a Senate advice and consent only type of thing, but this bill does implement that international agreement fully beyond, with one exception, which is it doesn't commit the US to funding it year on year, but I'm not sure any legislation can do that these days. So that is standard practice. For climate benefits, so because we're not directly addressing emissions, but rather production and import, it's a little bit hard to show just an emissions benefit, but we basically are using HFCs today or in 2018 between 300 and 350 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. if this bill were enacted tomorrow and the regulations implementing it followed within the next year, which is what is prescribed, this would be the drawdown schedule of that new production and importation. As I mentioned, this is a global implementation, a US implementation of the global Kigali Amendment. This is a worldwide agreement to largely do the same thing, although there are some different timelines in there. So on the right, you do see the emissions reductions. This is a similar story of a massive growth curve that we project because we're replacing these ozone depleting substances and because cooling appliances are becoming so important in an ever warming world. This amendment will cap warming from HFCs to 0.06 Celsius, which we hope is really a worst case, and we can do better than that maybe by half, but that's not an issue today. Status of this, state of play. So because this was agreed, the overall plan was agreed internationally, quite a while ago. There is pretty good NGO, industry, government consensus that we can do this. I will say that every month, year that passes from 2016, when we committed to do this, the timeline that everyone has to implement it is shrinking. So our coalition is, eager to get going, I would say. Support comes fairly broadly from different groups. The regulated industry has basically been convinced that they would have to do this for a while, and so now they're looking to just get this on the books and move forward and not have to tell their bosses that they invested in the wrong new technology, or rather that they didn't have to invest in climate friendlier technologies. Environmental NGOs that submitted letters to the Senate hearing are listed here. This is not a comprehensive list, perhaps may not even be current, although I don't know anybody falling off the wagon from this list. Opposition, certainly we see companies and their members in Congress that are seeking a break from this. The political winds changed right after 2016 or in 2016 when this was agreed. And they basically see that perhaps they don't have to follow through with this. And there's also no preemption of state authority to regulate HFCs in this bill, as it was introduced in either chamber. And that, some people would like to see preemption of states on climate grounds as a general matter. So that's just been an issue at stake, throughout the hearings and such. So NRDC, we haven't been doing a ton of work with particular offices. We've been engaging with some, that you might expect and plan to step that up next year, and certainly with potentially a new administration. The industry has generally been working with those that you might expect them to be working with. So that is my summary, and I would really love to take any questions and discuss it with you. I might get rid of this screen if you don't mind.
It's great. So Rachel will be asking questions. I think we have to mute and unmute everybody. You want to mute the whole room? I unmuted. All right, that's better. So one question quickly, how many co-sponsors are there currently in the House?
28.
28. All right, is there a collective, I know there's all these groups behind it, is there a kind of collective effort to go after sponsors, or is this like leadership driven?
I guess it's leadership driven. Although I'm far from a strategist of these sorts, so I apologize for not really knowing. But I think part of for reasons that probably make sense, for the last several years, it has been helpful to present a bipartisan package here. And so I think there certainly was some emphasis on keeping the appearance of a bipartisan package, which it is. But I think in the House, it's a little bit more challenging to get widespread adoption, or endorsement of this on both sides of the aisle. So that's sort of why we have been not so active in scaring up support at this stage more broadly. If that makes sense.
All right. So, all right, but it's a good bill for us to include in the package. It sounds like it's got all this broad support and doesn't sound like it has any serious opposition. So go ahead, Rachel, you had some other questions?
Yes. So in terms of opposition, a few people would like to hear more about the preemption dispute, asking if there's a chance for that to be resolved this session, and any other thoughts you have on what's going on with that. That seems to be the major opposition.
Yeah, it is. It has been, I should say. I think as they did turn, well, I won't even say that. As the political situation continues to evolve this fall, obviously, I think the entrenchment of certain folks in certain positions is probably lessening, just given where things hopefully are going. And so I think, I don't know anything, I can promise you that. I do think that may be softening. I hope so anyways. And we do still hope that there is a path forward that doesn't include preemption in this Congress. And I don't think the door is shut to it. And in terms of where, what we think about it and such, it's very clear from the states that we work with, state governments, and more the executive branch than their representatives, but nonetheless, there's really no tolerance for preemption, of really any sort, certainly beyond the very most diminutive, de minimis kind of thing in some weird case. So I think that, that's where NRDC has been, and I think most of the other environmental organizations as well.
Thanks. Our next question.
And I would also just say that preemption is not being pursued by most of the industry. And this sort of arose as an issue that we never actually heard from. And in fact, I believe it was which one was it? It was the AHRI, which is the trade group. Actually, when asked at a hearing, do you support this bill, including preemption of states? The answer was no. So I think that kind of speaks to the fact that this concept of preemption was coming from a different place than industry stakeholders that you might typically expect to be pushing that.
It's so weird because you would think you would want a national standard on something like this, and the states could do, if they want. The problem is states having more stringent requirements, which would create, a whole series of different regulatory regimes.
Yeah.
But anyway, we don't have to get too hung up on that. It's not in the bill right now, right?
It is not, and I just would respond to that. That's exactly, currently NRDC is working to put in place exactly that patchwork in states with some progress. And some 16 states are working on HFC programs. But the way this has worked is that states do act when the federal government is not doing its job in this area, that being, say ozone depleting substances is mostly what I'm talking about, CFCs. But once the federal government steps in and implements this international treaty, which is a little bit the way it's supposed to work, states, without being told they can't do anything, generally sit back and only engage in a limited way when they absolutely have to, in this area.
All right, so we'll see. I mean, I think I try to stay out of putting my thumb on any scale on these concepts, but I think as a climate movement, and given the scale of the changes we need and the time frame that we're looking at for devastation, hopefully people are up to the idea of more aggressive federal leadership. And anyway, that's a conversation for another time. Oh, Rachel, what other questions you have? And then we have only about 5 more minutes, and then we'll move on to fracking.
Okay, we have maybe 2 more questions. First, we have a question. It seems like the bill contains several permissions for the EPA to act. And the question is, why not include the requirements of what the EPA needs to do? Or could you clarify if that's
Yeah.
not the correct impression?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say is that this bill is strong in that it requires EPA to do the big thing, which is implement the supply phase down of HFCs. There is no discretion left to the agency in that way, which you can imagine is important and was important, especially 2 years ago or so. So that's good. The authority to accelerate is an authority. It is permitted to. That really is the most sensible way to include it, because to require it without requiring what it would be is a little bit sort of out of sorts. So I think the view is that that is suitable. There's the requirement to do these leaky HFC appliance regulations, which I think is good. And yeah, the other authority that's not mandatory is replacing HFCs banning HFCs in specific uses as there are no better alternatives. I would actually have to check the Senate version. It may be a mandate in that version. It's an authority in the House version. I can't say why we're not demanding that, but I do, yeah, I don't know offhand. But I think it's also a little bit tricky without saying exactly what the agency should do. It's hard to prescribe a requirement that it do it. But that's something we can definitely look at. And, you know, with folks on this call, we're open to suggesting that kind of improvement for sure.
Great. Keep in mind, everybody, you know, bills are a constantly moving journey. So next year it'll be refiled, and who knows, there could be additions, improvements for next year. Any other last minute questions, Rachel?
Yeah, there's one question about heat pumps, because Catherine says she heard there's an alternative to HFC heat pumps that have limited production or not available in the US. And she wants to know if you know this is true, or if you know anything else about replacing HFCs in heat pumps.
Any day I can get off the phone without talking about how heat pumps connect to HFC phase down is a good day, but no, I'm kidding. This should not be a problem, is the good news, but it is always, yeah, it is, we are looking to now to make sure that heat pumps can suitably and, you know, well use the alternatives to HFCs that other air conditioners and non-heat pumps can use. So I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but it is something we're thinking a lot about, and many stakeholders with strong electrification agendas, states, groups, NRDC, this is an issue at top of mind, and it is not always an easy one. So thank you for the question.
And Alex, have you looked at the Climate Crisis Select Committee's House plan, the action plan, and does it address this topic?
Yes, it does. It essentially, I believe it says that Kigali ratification plus implementing legislation is top of order. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And not to put you on the spot for this, because I know you're not in that division of NRDC, and I want to ask all this question of Brian as well before we go to Jim in just a couple minutes. Are you aware of any macro organizing alignments or coalition building plans for the climate legislative battles next year in a new Congress? When immigration reform was coming up for comprehensive immigration reform, that community created Reform Immigration for America, and that linked all the state level coalitions, and they just had a coordinated effort ready for that push so they could mobilize, speak with one voice on policy. Are you aware of any such organizing at the national level yet?
I personally am not. That's not a very satisfying answer, but as you can maybe tell, I'm the HFCs guy. So I wish I could help further, but I can certainly continue to look into that.
All right, great. Yeah, we had talked about you chatting with folks internally about it. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This is great. I think we're going to have to keep moving. Of course, we'll have ability for people to ask questions, et cetera, going forward, and we'll get those to folks as we can. Brian, before I move on to Jim, just in case you have to bounce, are you aware of any macro organizing plans at the national level to be prepared for next year?
I am not. I'm afraid I've been a little myopic with the campaigns directly in front of me: plastics, the shark fin ban, and offshore drilling. But I certainly will, look into it. I would definitely like to, to be better informed. But I don't have much to add on that, I'm afraid.
No worries, no worries. I should have asked y'all in advance, but that's okay. This is the conversation and questioning that I have going forward. I mean, I'm happy that we're doing this. It's a great team. We have good traction, but I'm also very aware of the scale of the opposition, the size of it, and the power of it, and the challenge we have going in, even with favorable supporters next year, to actually getting the kind of results that we need with. So I'm just eager to see something like that materialize, and want to help try to be a catalyst for that conversation to the extent we can. All right, moving on. Jim, are you with us? I think I see you there. You're muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself. We next have Jim Walsh from Food and Water Action talking about the Ban Fracking Act. And you've heard from Jim on this bill before, but we're just going to go over it again and answer any questions and making sure that we're bringing everyone along the way on the package as a whole. So that we can try to get to some level of agreement on what the package should include for Climate Week. Again, if somebody could post in the chat how to join a sector team, and more importantly, how to adopt your own district. We just encourage everyone to do that. We need to have a point person in every congressional district who can help coordinate the local teams, who can engage the local elected official, and then tap into all these other coalitions. So you get the picture, right? We're trying to build a linked network so that, if the plastics folks say, oh, we don't have this person and we want that person, we could turn to the team in that district and say, can you go work on that, But obviously the idea is the package will give us capacity that we don't have individually, either as groups or as activists or even coalitions working on siloed issues. So I'm looking every way I can to try to expand our capacity and our power for next year, because it's really going to go down next year and we need to get a lot of wins on the scoreboard. All right, Jim, I'm sorry to do that little spiel in the middle of your presentation.
All is well. Thank you, Todd, very much for all of your work pulling this together. Thanks to the group leaders and everyone who's been working to put this this whole effort together. I know it's a tremendous undertaking, and thank you, of course, for considering the Fracking Ban Act in this policy and taking feedback that we've given on some of the other policies too. I greatly appreciate the inclusion in that regard. And so so first, just a little bit of background on this. I'm the Senior Energy Policy Analyst for Food and Water Action and Food and Water Watch. We are working on this effort to pass the Fracking Ban Act in Congress and largely to get the supply side issues addressed for fossil fuels in a comprehensive climate legislation that passes. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of the history of the fracking movement and the Fracking Ban Act, our organizing strategy, and kind of the next steps and actions we plan on taking. And so we've been working on this issue since 2010. We were the first national group to ban fracking. And at that point in time, we started forming a national coalition, Americans Against Fracking, which had at that point in time about 300 organizations across the country who supported a ban on fracking in many states and places across the United States. That coalition worked to forward this issue nationally and also worked to pass bans in a few different states and many municipalities and counties across the country. And that coalition also spurred a number of events which were known as the Global Frackdown, where there were massive global mobilizations against fracking. as well as a variety of other educational initiatives and from film screenings and other things that were put together. And so we've been doing as an organization a lot of work on this, but there's been very strong grassroots support that has helped to move this issue forward and across the country and in various states and municipalities. The Fracking Ban Act was the first introduced in February of this year by Senator Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez. And that initial 300 or so organizations that were supporting a ban on fracking has grown to over 600 now organizations across the United States who are supporting that policy and calling on Congress to act on that legislation. The specifics of the bill and what this bill does is it essentially stops the federal government from issuing new permits for pipelines, fracking, LNG, export terminals, storage, ethane cracker plants. So that's, you know, the use of ethane to crackers to essentially process natural gas liquids, which are a byproduct from fracking, which are used in plastics. So that would actually shut down any new plastic infrastructure that would be proposed in the country, as well as any new gas power plants that would be constructed. It also pulls permits out from any fracking wells that are within 2,500 feet of homes, schools, or uninhabited structures. And so this is a major issue that has been gaining traction in a few states, but California, there's a very robust coalition that's working for similar setbacks rules to address the issue of all the emissions that are happening near these fracking wells and causing significant public health concerns. And so making sure that those aren't near places where people and children are regularly going to. And then the other thing that's important about this bill is it actually takes a look at a just transition committee, which would essentially create recommendations to address the health and prosperity of communities in natural gas and oil producing regions. And so there's a lot of discussion going on around just transition and how to help workers and support them. And this would actually create essentially it would be a federal table that would be responsible for actually bringing together the relevant entities that would be necessary to ensure a just transition from community leaders and labor groups and environmental justice groups to ensure that we're actually implementing policies to help communities that have been historically dependent and overburdened by gas and oil production and use in the United States. And then finally would result in a ban on fracking nationwide starting in January 1st, 2025. And this bill is a lot of things, you know, in terms of stopping fracking, but what this fits into is a larger strategy. And I touched on this a little bit in my last presentation for those who are there, but you know, right now, if you look at the Biden climate plan, you look at the plan that just came out from the Senate, you look at the Select Committee on Climate Crisis plan, you look at the Clean Future Act that the Energy and Commerce leadership put forward, all of those plans entirely ignore the supply side of fossil fuels. They don't do anything to actually stop the development of fracking and more gas infrastructure. They rely on a lot of market-based mechanisms and other things which we know will continue the production of fossil fuels in the United States. And so what this legislation is doing is really building a constituency within Congress for that supply side issue, where most of the efforts around the fracking in the fracking movement have been very focused at the state legislatures and governor's offices in different states. This is really an effort to now move that energy and point it directly at Congress and push those, you know, to the members of Congress to be stronger on this. The Fracking Ban Act is not a piece of legislation that will pass on its own, right? It will be something that we work to include this policy or something like this in a larger climate package that is moving in the House and Senate, hopefully next year with a lined up supportive administration and Congress that's willing to act aggressively on climate change, and working to make sure that this is included in that package, that these supply side issues aren't ignored. One of the things that's important in this, you look at these policies, a lot of them, deal with this, general discussion of carbon neutrality. And carbon neutrality, when we hear that, flags should go up, particularly when we're thinking about, the climate crisis. There are policies that are being put together to design and craft offsets that will be able to be used to justify continuing to keep fossil fuels online. The oil and gas industry is pushing aggressively for false solutions like carbon capture sequestration technology that will require, or that will allow essentially them to capture gas from power plants and pump it into the earth. And where they pump this into the earth is actually for a process called enhanced oil recovery. And the oil and gas industry is out there falling all over themselves to call this carbon neutral oil drilling, which we all know you cannot have carbon neutral oil drilling, right? And so they're using these things to mislead the public and mislead the Congress about these policies. And so this really cuts across that need to eliminate the fossil fuels in this country and move off of those spaces, which is being totally ignored for the most part in the national dialogue coming out of Congress, coming out of the larger discussions in Washington, D.C. And so how are we doing this? Really, this has been a grassroots campaign, and we're continuing to do that. Our organizing staff in different states are working with local fracking coalitions to set up meetings and generate phone calls and emails and sending texts to get more phone calls and emails into congressional offices to move more co-sponsors onto this legislation. There's also a national kind of loosely network of organizations that regularly communicates about these supply side issues and how we can address them in various ways that, as the kind of the agenda in Congress is moving forward or not moving forward to make these issues more relevant in Congress. Some things that we're asking groups to do to help support this. One is texting FRAC to 69866 will actually sign a petition, but more importantly, it'll add you to our texting list, which will give you updates on things going on with the fracking campaign. You can also sign organizations on to officially endorse the Fracking Ban Act. So that we can continue to build support, and then also plug those groups into our local organizing efforts that our organizers on the ground are working on for the organizations that are interested in participating in that. So that's, I guess, my quick 2 seconds on this. And if people in New York are interested in getting involved, obviously Eric Weltman, I think a lot of people probably know him. His email is here, and so folks can certainly reach out to him about specifically the New York campaigns and kind of the offices they're working with and what they're doing in that space. So I will, I guess, take questions now if anybody has them.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. We really appreciate all of this. It's amazing work. All right, Rachel, I'll just go to you for questions. I have some, but I'll hold them.
Great. We only have a couple, but I'm sure more will come in. So we have a question: what is being done to promote alternatives? And I think I would like to add to that question, asking, how do you see this, the ban side of getting rid of fracking being coupled with other legislation to promote renewable energy? Or
yeah, so this bill does not force us to build clean energy, right? But what it does is it actually stops the gas industries competing directly with clean energy, right? And the industry plan right now is to promote offsets, carbon trading and pricing, and carbon capture sequestration in Congress to continue a lifeline to this industry, to continue counting carbon atoms. We know where the carbon is coming from, right? We need to shut off the supply of carbon into those spaces. When we are seeing right now, the market forces are starting to has been very aggressively forcing coal out of the electric sector. And it's starting to happen with gas as we're seeing more clean energy development happen. One of the things that's happening in this, though, is that the industry is actually building up a plastics hedge right now. And so that's one of the reasons that we've included this cracker language in here to stop new plastics infrastructure from being constructed. And to prevent the industry from doing that hedge. Most of the gas that we produce in this country doesn't go to home heating needs and electricity uses. It goes to industrial and refining uses. And the byproducts from gas, are now being turned into these plastics as well. When you look at the natural gas liquids, it isn't even what they're initially going to frack for, but it's a hedge the industry is putting out there. And so I think the other part of this in terms of what it, in terms of how do we think about this as being, an alternative, one of the things people talk about is the need to have a just transition. And that is super important. One of the things that, is critical to a just transition is building out more clean energy infrastructure and making sure that the jobs that come in with that are good union paying jobs that pay living wages and provide benefits to workers. But also part of that just transition is not making the situation worse for communities that are already very dependent on fossil fuels. When we build new power plants, that's more workers who are then needed to be transitioned off of that industry. That's also more sunk costs that we are putting into this infrastructure that we don't need, that could otherwise be spent on clean energy alternatives. And so so while this doesn't actually mandate any clean energy, it certainly creates a more space for that to move forward and that to develop. I hope that answers the question.
Very
I
interesting.
think so.
And Jim, last time we spoke, you were explaining to me, I was asking you the question, does this eliminate the supply of gas as a transitional fuel in the market through as we go to renewables? And you explained to me that it wasn't. Could you just touch
That's
on
right. Yeah, so I think that's one of the concerns that people have asked is, what does this do to, our gas supply? So 75% of produced natural gas in 2019 is from shale, right? So this is, really dealing, and that supply of gas has really only existed for 15 years or so, really in any substantial way. And, since fracking really took hold in the country. And so what we're doing is cutting off that supply of gas. And when you look at, where is the gas, being used, about 16% goes for residential usage. That's people with hot water heaters and gas stoves and things like that. And about a third is for electric power. And so then we're exporting the rest of it. The rest of it is going to these industrial and commercial or in industrial and refineries and things like that. And so, we're not going to cut off the need for gas, but what we're going to do is cut off the industry's continued expansion of that. And comprehensive climate legislation should and needs to address those issues related to the demand side. We need to provide resources to transition homeowners off of gas heating and gas cooking, and provide electrification options for those things, such as heat pumps, which were discussed, and the challenges with that, and the greenhouse gases from heat pumps. But what this does, though, is really address that larger piece of fracking, which has enabled this massive expansion of gas across the country, and was totally there was we were doing fine prior to the fracking boom happening, right? So this idea that we're going to all of a sudden cut off our noses by banning fracking is ridiculous, because we were doing fine prior to that happening. And so well, maybe not fine, but I mean, like, we weren't experiencing these major shortages, and we don't anticipate them happening because of this happening. And as we move towards more efforts with energy efficiency, and we move forward efforts to help with electrification of residential units and heating and cooking, will lessen our dependence on these fossil fuels for gas as well.
Wonderful. And now, Jim, so we have only a couple minutes, and then we're going to have someone from our marketing team come and talk a little bit about their approach to engaging the marketing industry on behalf of these bills, the package, and then solutions generally, and climate action next year. But Jim, can you just then share a little bit about any macro organizing, or what the plan is for next year? How is this vast industry, this not only the environmental movement, but civil society more broadly, organizing itself to be ready for the opportunity that's presenting itself next year, hopefully?
Sure. So, I think there's really, I think one thing that we all need to be prepared for, no matter what space we occupy in the movement is, and I think a lot of us were caught a little flat-footed with the outcome of the last presidential election and weren't prepared for that outcome. We're expecting something very different. It caused a need to pivot pretty substantially. And I think that we just need to think about what are our strategies under various scenarios of the outcomes of Congress and the White House in November. That being said, the larger principles should not change, and I don't expect to change. And we need a significant block of Congress to make this issue important. If we're going to get this moved into federal legislation and get the supply side addressed, we need to have a group of members who will make this a priority. And so legislation like this is what's working to build that constituency of representatives of Congress. And that power to do that is going to come.
Oh, did you get muted, Greg? Jim? Sorry, unmute yourself.
Does that mean I'm cut off?
Oh, no. Go ahead. No.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
But so, Jim, I get this point about building a constituency for the fracking bill. But what about on a bigger level, the climate movement itself, organizing a national coalition so that all of these big groups, I mean, you hear like what you're talking about in the intersection with the plastics issues and what Brian's talking about. And I mean, they're just so many natural synergies, obviously, this is a given, but I don't see the infrastructure and the coalition framework and the public facing messaging that invites everybody into a collective effort. So I know I'm putting everybody on the spot and we don't have to figure this out today, but I want to keep asking this question until I hear someone say, yes, we're forming a national coalition. Here's who's involved. Here's how you get involved. Here's what's going to look like. Here's the staffing, and so go on.
Sure. Yeah. So we did, create Americans Against Fracking and did a lot of work around that to build broad awareness and engagement within those organizations. We've been focusing, I think, with our work at building these local coalitions more, to focusing specifically in targeted congressional districts in key states where we want to dig in on these things. And it's not to say that doing stuff outside of those places isn't important. It absolutely is, but we're also trying to be to dig deep in some of these areas where we need to. Moving into next year, I think one of the places is how do we expand and push on this is absolutely going to be part of that discussion. And working to build and expand that coalition like Americans Against Fracking and bringing that together is something that we, that there may be space to do something along those lines. But what our focus really is, though, is not kind of working right now in every single congressional district, but it's really working to build in these districts where we've identified that we have an opportunity to move some of these members in a very in-depth way. And so those sorts of things at some level kind of can support each other, and they can also pull away from each other. And so I think, you guys right now are working to create this space to create that, inviting, place where a lot of groups can come together around these climate policies. And, and we're trying to support that in the ways that we're able to. And also, focusing where we think is really important right now in the supply side fight is building that really strong constituency for these issues and making sure that that matters. And we see making that matter is not necessarily having, I think like people in every single congressional district right now, but working to build those constituencies in these key areas. And moving in towards next year, though, that focus may change, and we're certainly discussing how that's going to fit in a variety of different scenarios that might come out of this. As I said before, things with under a Trump administration with a Democratic Senate looks very different than a Biden administration or the Republican Senate, and how you would approach those things.
Right. All right. Well, that's wonderful. So it sounds like all the individual topical coalitions are revving up their campaigns. And that's great, because the next we can just link them together, as long as they're, building infrastructure and communications networks, and, the way we can link everyone to speak with one collective powerful voice next year. Well, Jim, thank you so much. To be continued.
Thank you. I need to hop, so I appreciate you having me. Have a great day.
Of course, we're so grateful to have you.
And I'll put my email in chat in case people have other questions. I saw there were a bunch of questions that came up here, so people can feel free to email me if they have questions. I'll be more than happy to try to follow up with you afterwards.
Oh, that's nice. And we can try to package those and make it a little bit more sane for you, Jim.
That would be great.
Right.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. The last 5 minutes, we have our marketing team. Joshua, are you ready? He's just going to give us a quick report back on their focus and efforts and their bios to show you how impressive they all are, because we're excited to have them.
That's a very generous intro. Hey guys, I'm Joshua Chafee. I think just to echo what everyone's been saying in the chat, first off, to thank you to those presenting the bills today, which just incredibly fascinating, and also makes these accessible and is kind of, I think, going to be the sort of main goal of the marketing efforts, to galvanize people and make these bills accessible. My background, briefly, which I think I told you at the last meeting, is in journalism and broadcasting at NBC and MSNBC, and I'm currently on a show with Showtime. The marketing team is being led by Brenna Cohen, she was the Northeast environmental coordinator at Patagonia, has done a tremendous amount of organizing around climate, a senior fellow at the Environmental Leadership Program, as well as Jonathan Brady, who is a veteran of the marketing industry and has worked for several of the big marketing agencies. And so we met and spoke along with Todd last week, and we kind of talked about the first sort of target or larger goal, which is the possibility of engaging the marketing industry and marketing industry CEOs in this project. And the idea that if we could get some of them on board, they have these pro bono arms, corporate responsibility initiatives, in which they will, in a pro bono way, fund campaigns to help market these ideas and solutions for nonprofits and other programs. We're also trying to leverage the sort of an initiative in the marketing field broadly that began 2016, which was the 6 sort of big multinational corporations committed to what's called the Common Ground Initiative, which was supporting the UN SDGs, Sustainability Development Goals, in some concrete way and in a pro bono way. So the idea is to get in touch with some of these sort of the larger corporations, hopefully to mine some support there that could scale up a marketing campaign very quickly. And, as Todd has spoke about, if it's possible to also get several of these companies engaged, you can have kind of a competitive situation of sort of the best ideas to take our idea, take the ideas behind this group and really broaden the reach of it. So we're kind of in the process right now of forming our pitches to these sort of larger agencies. If there are people that are on this call that have a background in marketing or contacts in marketing, it would be definitely very helpful, especially as we reach out to some of the larger corporations. The second avenue that we are pursuing is an industry association called the 4As, and they as opposed to sort of these large multinational corporations that have several agency subsidiaries, this is an association for small to mid-sized marketing agencies that also have pro bono budgets, that also do sort of social and social good projects. So we're reaching out to those as well. But you know, as kind of an initial ask, if there are people that do have experience in this and have some contacts in the industry, please reach out. I'm actually going to put in our chat here just the email of Brenna Cohen, who kind of, for all things marketing, reach out to her email, brenc@gmail.com. We are also have sort of an avenue. I'm reaching out to media organizations to see where there can be collaboration as well as coverage of our initiative, especially you know, a month from now, leading up to Climate Week, and then sort of a longer ongoing relationship later this year and next year. So groups like Climate Desk, which is a collaboration of media outlets that they sort of pool resources and ideas to more effectively cover climate crisis. So it's made up of several different media outlets, and then sort of another avenue that we're looking at is, and this is sort of whether it becomes a marketing strategy or if it's used to just help pitch our overall product, is this idea of collecting sort of storylines for these bills and solutions. So something that we spoke about at the core team meeting was if there are people that, as you're going through these the climate bills that are going to be part of this package, if you have any personal stories or know people that have personal stories related to things bills, please reach out to us just to tell those stories. And they you know, are things that can be used as we're kind of making this marketing pitch. And so that could be, you know, in terms of the Ban Fracking Act, it could be that there's fracking in your hometown or someone you know that has a story they can tell about that. It could be that you are a rural farmer that's looking to transition to clean energy or to sustainable practices, regenerative farming, and have found it to be, you know, that it saves you money and as well as capturing carbon. And you might be involved in community gardens in your neighborhood to help, you know, usher in local food sources. So, you know, that's sort of our second ask is if there are sort of some personal stories that you or people in your family, friend circle, or organization has that could be an effective way to make these bills more accessible for people, please send them over, send them to Brenna's email, and, you know, we can see how we proceed. It may be that we want to do sort of an online or you know, video testimonial strategy or project when the time comes. You know, so we're just kind of looking to collect data now and aspects, tools that we can use in this sort of this marketing push. And the last thing is that we are looking at sort of media and stories that have already been compiled in the form of documentary or news stories that go along with these bills. Jake Davis had from the Family Farm Alliance had spoken about soil carbon cowboys, which is excellent. You know, we just heard about the story of plastic. I have not seen, looking forward to it. But those are stories that we can help incorporate in this sort of marketing push and help sort of galvanize interest for this. It's also something that we can reach out to these directors and filmmakers to help engage them in this effort. So that is, those are pretty much the updates here and of the marketing team. But if you also have other ideas for us or interest in the sort of marketing aspect, which will be sort of the after we come together on the bill package, will be the next stage, please reach out to Brenna and look forward to working with everyone here.
Thank you so much, Joshua. We were going to have marketing team go first so everyone could get excited because I know some people have to drop off. We've run a little bit late on time, although we're doing great generally as a rule on that front. I just want to mention the faith team organizing. I see Nancy Lawrence is with us on the call, and she and Karuna Gore are co-hosting that, and they've been in touch with various faith groups that are already involved in legislative advocacy, sort of getting the lay of the land from their perspective, and they'll be convening a call of faith groups. So if you're part of a faith climate group or a faith group and would like to be part of that, please let us know. I put in the chat the link which said that all of our contacts and all of the materials and documents and the intake forms and all of the stuff we've been talking about is in one document. And you can find the email contact there for Jeannie, Corinna's assistant, who's fielding that. And then we were going to have Tara Vamos and our adopted district team come and say hello, but we've run out of time. So we just want to plug that again, and please volunteer for an adopted district. And Tara's asked me to remind everyone that everyone will be guided through this process, you know, and we'll have toolkit and all the materials you need. So don't be afraid of it. Just join if you feel, if you're in a district and you want to be involved in this part of the task. And we'll take it all together step by step. I'm going to adopt my district. And last, the policy team, just please join the policy team if you're interested in a sector. Ask that you join one sector so we can get that work going. And we'd like to review the House climate plan and read other documents within the next few weeks. So that's why we're asking people to focus on that. And we'll, yeah, that work will get underway, and we'll have the first meeting. Well, you'll be getting emails over the next week or so about that if you've joined a team. And the greenhouse gas team, sector team, is having its own phone call today at 5 o'clock. And people who've expressed interest in that have already gotten a Zoom for that. But if you're interested in that and haven't gotten it, email me after this meeting and we'll send you that link. And I think that's everything. The website's being updated, and we'll have all the information about who's adopted what in the bills package and everything. That'll be done before Climate Week. And so the push is on, you know, the next few weeks. Please try to reach out to friends and find people in different districts to adopt a district, and be ready for the sector team. Start reading the House plan, and we'll hopefully have a nice package to launch by September 20th. And then after that, we'll have report backs from all the sector teams on the, you know, those policy arenas. And by the end of October, we should start to have an idea of what's included and what's missing in terms of legislative proposals and policy proposals. And that'll help give us focus for moving forward. And then my last pitch is this. You know, sometimes I get a little overwhelmed about what we're undertaking as a team, even though we have wonderful people from incredible groups. I just ask you to think about the organizations that you're affiliated with, that have national reach, that have serious funding, and start thinking about how you can communicate with the leadership of those organizations about forming a national climate coalition, about helping with a national adopt a district situation. We need much greater capacity, even though we're doing yeoman's work and great work and leading the way. The hope is that this will be a catalyst for much broader coalition work before we get to next year when it's showtime. All right, everyone, I thank you so much for continued participation, and the next meeting will be in 2 weeks of this. The general meeting will be in every 2 weeks on Wednesday at noon. And then again, the core team meetings are the first and third Mondays of the month at 7 p.m. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time, and shout out with any questions you have. And that's it. Everyone's saying thank you. That's very sweet. Thank you all so much, everyone who's involved. I really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.